Hi, I'm Alicia Abendroth, and this is Tridge Agri-insider, your agri-food for thought podcast where we talk about anything and everything agri-food supply chain, brought to you by Tridge. Verdant Tech CRO Matthew Aronson offers insights into his personal career journey and the pivotal decisions he made when standing at the crossroads that ultimately led him to a career in agriculture. On today's episode of Agri-insider, we unpack the challenges of launching an AgTech startup and learn about the rewarding moments that come with contributing to a better food future. Hi, Matt. It's great to have you today with us on Agri-insider. Welcome to the show.
Alicia, thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's exciting to just be part of you guys, starting this podcast and kind of bringing it to life. So excited to be part of that.
And I appreciate you joining us on this journey. It's been exciting. We've had some great episodes, but I'm definitely looking forward to what you're going to be telling us and sharing with the audience today. So I thought let's, go right to the beginning. Let's dive in at the beginning of Matt's life, or maybe not that far back. We can also start at where you got into, or how you got into agriculture. What got you involved in this industry? And it's for a lot of people that has to do with the beginning of their life, but maybe that wasn't quite the journey for you.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to start. My journey certainly wasn't one that I would say maybe, at least on the surface, trace back to like the early years. I mean, I think about if you would have even told me 10 years ago that I would now have dropped out of grad school, I'd be through 2 AgTech startups, and I'd be living on a farm. I don't know which of those things I would have believed less, but they're all true. And so I think maybe my journey, maybe somewhat unconsciously or sort of in the background, kind of led me to where I am now. But I think for me, my world, even before those 10 years, like leading up to that, my world, I think, and my passion was really all around like energy and the environment. And so what I was studying, the work I was doing, the things I aspired to do, the, people I admired, companies I admired, were kind of in that space, energy and the environment. I think what I've now found in this agriculture space, food and specifically, produce and flowers has been, there's this really wonderful nexus between energy and the environment and food and farming. And so I think that kind of got me hooked pretty early on in this journey. And since then have continued to learn and discover just through my own work and partnering with others and around all the other dimensions to this space, whether that's culture and community, geopolitics and health. And so it's just like constant like learning curve after learning curve. So really in the space, there's like something for everyone I've come to learn. So
I agree completely. And I really liked what you said about the synergy that's happening between environment, energy, but then also food and farming. I agree. There's a lot of parallels between the two sectors, and we can get into that a little bit later. But okay, you said, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have believed had someone said you'd be in this industry. So what did you want to be as a kid? I mean, what was your childhood passion?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm sure my mom is love her dearly. She's probably saved all my old book reports and probably got a lot of great videos of me like kicking the soccer ball. I don't know if there was ever really that vividly I want to be the astronaut or kind of passion so much. It's funny. I have a young son who's about to turn 2, and so my wife and I we often kind of ask ourselves that question now about him, like what is he going to be when he grows up? And you just try to like support them, put whatever in their hands, books, balls, whatever. So we're asking, ourselves that same question. So when I think back, while there may not have been that like one vocation or one thing, I've always been fascinated with like how things work. I think at a very young age, and that may have been what I guess you might say kind of led me to at least studying engineering. But I think for me, as I think back my, adolescent early years and even, fast forward to now have really been sort of marked by like a series of sort of different crossroads. And some of which like at the time felt like really tough decisions which way to go. And early on, whether that was STEM, science, technology, or like music, and my love for learning and playing music, and maybe seemingly disparate paths. And so like kind of went more formally like the STEM route. Still try to dabble music a little bit. But then, getting into college, it was, going more like the policy route. I had an opportunity to kind of work in Washington and went more like, energy, with an internship and like these like big crossroads. I think back like, man, where would I be? And then, gosh, I remember even leaving college, it was like I had an offer to go work at a job kind of in the energy space. But I was like, do I want to do that? Consulting? You know what? I'm just going to like kind of tear that up and apply for grad school and see what happens, and move to California and do the grad school thing. And then it was like, do I drop out of grad school to pursue this startup opportunity? I mean, again, it's always been this like series of crossroads. And so I don't know, I guess I feel maybe, that this is one of those like very path dependent sort of things where, I mean, it's these series of choices and crossroads that have, I feel really grateful, for them to have kind of led me to this point. So I don't know if that's quite the answer to your question, but I don't know, maybe my mom will listen to this and she'll remind me that like I wanted to be a firefighter or something. But,
yeah. No, that was a great answer to that question, because I think those crossroads in life, we kind of forget them once we've made the decisions. I mean, I sometimes look back and I'm like, had I just made this one turn, life would have been so differently. But when you're in the moment, you kind of don't always reflect on that. So, even hearing you speak, you made me kind of think about different crossroads I've encountered in my life. And it's interesting how we found ourselves together in this call today, right? All those different turns led to this moment. And I had to chuckle about what you said with your mom, because my husband always says when he was a kid, they'd ask him this all the time. And he just started having a one line like architect, and because he just wanted people off his back, right? And so I had to kind of laugh. I'm like, I shouldn't ask this question, because I think kids they end up digging themselves into this non-exploratory kind of funnel, because they just want to get parents off their back, when it's good to be a kid and exploring, right? So
absolutely, that's the joy of it.
It is. So okay, so you took a lot of different you made a lot of different big decisions. Your life has kind of led you to this path today. I mean, when you were making those decisions and evaluating and, writing your pro and con list, what kind of drove this shift to agriculture? I mean, why was, I don't know, I think you said you left grad school to work in an agri startup, right?
Yeah.
Like what was on that pro list besides maybe the financial gain, right? We can leave that, paying student debt is nice. But what were some of the things that drove that passion or that decision?
It's making that leap from grad school, which had been a path, chemical engineering and research, and really at the interface of, material science and quantum physics. And, it's like hopping into ag. At the time it was stepping into a technical role, leading an engineering team and really working on like manufacturing and supply chain and kind of scale up. So, but getting to do it like for real in the real life. And so I think, it was exciting from an engineering standpoint, but I think even moreover, I'd always had, for as long as I can remember, my own entrepreneurial aspirations. And so it's easy to, and I think, wonderful to like read the books, listen to, especially now, like the podcasts, founders and find that inspiration. And I think certain things about our culture, maybe to some degree, like romanticize that. It's so exciting, kind of that sexy thing to do, the startup. But then when it's right in front of you and you have that choice to make, like, do I have that stomach to make that leap? There's always that opportunity cost. So at that time, that leap for me was not about like ag versus, a different industry. It was more that the leap to like this new venture space startups, like, is that for me? And, again, reading all the books, and it was sort of right in front of me and kind of closing my eyes. Of course, there's always going to be that opportunity cost, like with any choice we make, but it was like finding it in myself to like make that leap. And then so grateful I did for many reasons. But it then led me, to this ag space that, the company I was working for, and very quickly again, it was like learning curve after learning curve, but got to know this space of ag and produce. And I think where that quickly led me, and I think, where I still am today is a couple of things. One, like farming, and I think agriculture in general is I would describe as problem solving, like fundamentally, which as an engineer to my core is what I love to do most. And problem. So I think there's a notion, that like a problem well stated is a problem half solved. And so just constantly on different scales, length scales, like problem solving every single day. I see it at my kind of small farm at home. I see it with the work I do in like global supply chains. And so I think this problem solving, that scratched that itch for sure. But then really getting to recognize there's just a huge opportunity for innovation. When I think about the food system, whether regional or global, here we are today, 2023, there's just a whole new set of knowledge and domains to, I think, like integrate and kind of consider as part of our food system and kind of its reimagination or redesign. When you consider like 90% of the data it's estimated in the world has been generated in the last 2 years. It's like hard to get your arms around that, but it's just to say like, there's just a great opportunity for innovation, which I think is really exciting. And I think maybe most importantly, at least for me, is just like recognizing and the impact, again, going back, energy and the environment and wanting to have an impact in that space where I'll reference things like Project Drawdown, kind of a summary of like the, top, 100, peer-reviewed solutions for, impacting climate change. And you kind of go through that, it's a great book. It's funny. My son loves flipping through it and like looking at the tractors and other pictures. But that Project Drawdown identifying like reducing food waste as the leading solution to impacting climate change, and kind of you realize that it's innovation, it's exciting, it's problem solving, but at the end of the day, just like being able to make that sort of impact on our planet is for me like what I guess gets me out of bed and gets me excited to work and continue to like attempt to solve some of these problems. So
I love that. So would you say then that reducing food waste and kind of solving some of these sustainability challenges through addressing food waste is your driver today? Is that a fair assessment then?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it for me. It's core to the mission of the company I work for now, and even the one previous. It's something very tangible. Sometimes these big issues are like hard to kind of visualize or touch, but I think we've all, even myself, admittedly, there's wasteful habits we all have. We throw things away. I try to teach my son, we don't waste food in this house. He launches a banana, what he's setting, but it's very real, and it's very tangible. So yeah, I think that's a big piece of it for me. And that continues to be part of my own, I guess, personal mission. The whole leaving the world a better place. I think some of the things you read, or maybe were impactful to you in some way, like at different phases of your life, take on new meaning. And that certainly is the case for me now, bringing a new generation into the world. So there's a quote I love. One of my favorite authors, Wendell Berry. He says, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So, things like that take on new meaning to, the work we do and, the goals we have. So
I love that saying. Thanks for mentioning that here in the podcast. That's a special one. Maybe that's a good segue then, because you kind of touched on what you're working on today and the company you're working with today. Could you tell us a bit about Verdant Technologies? Why Verdant? Why now?
Yeah. I've been with Verdant now for almost 2 years. It's great. I don't know if it seems longer or shorter than that. Time, I don't know about you, but I'm going to say post-COVID-ish. Time feels like such an enigma, and it's like, how long has it been? But anyways, been there for almost 2 years. I like to describe Verdant very simply as a AgTech startup, and a startup in kind of all the best ways, really kind of mission-driven team, innovation. I would also describe Verdant Technologies as an organization really rooted, and this goes back years before I joined, kind of the garage story, But years before I joined, an organization rooted in science and innovation. And what's really formed our purpose, like for our team, you kind of do those exercises, developing like that purpose, vision, the mission statement. For our team, it's really, finding inspiration and imagining what a nourished world could do. So this idea of nourishment is something that's like really core to us and the work we do in our purpose. So the word nourishment, it kind of takes on different meanings. It's not just like the calories and the nutrients, but in the food, but the joy that comes with things like flowers and kind of the whole sensory experience and the communities that we impact. So this journey of like nourishment and kind of science and innovation has like initially led us to fresh produce and flowers, and so where we develop nature-inspired solutions to help reduce food waste and improve customer experience. And we could nerd out on the science. I always love doing that, but I think the way I would kind of describe the products that we're bringing to market is it's like an innovative spin on a proven technology. It's like a different way to apply a technology that was developed decades ago. And I think that's a great framework for innovation. It's not always new tech. It can be a new way to apply or integrate, proven or old technology. And so that's what we're doing. We've got, an innovative way to apply an old technology, which has really been an unlock for it to be applied to more fruits and vegetables. And at the end of the day, what we're providing to our partners, to the supply chain, is more time. Fundamentally, so I believe firmly that time is the most valuable resource we have on this planet. Doesn't matter what industry, who you're talking to. And so that's at the end of the day. There's great tech behind it, although there's no app, there's no AI.
Okay.
It's a physical product with some really cool material science behind it. We call it harvest hold, and that's what we're using for fruits and vegetables. And then we've got another kind of name, ethylene buster sheets, for what we use in flowers, fresh cut flowers. But in both cases, it's a roll. Think paper towel roll that you might have in your kitchen. You tear the sheet off, you put it in the bottom of the box. The produce or flowers go, in there as well. And what it does in releasing a certain gas, it helps our partners manage ethylene in their supply chain. And so that, again, fruits and vegetables and flowers are perishable. They'll go bad. And so we're just, by extending the shelf life or the vase life, we're giving them more time. There's grower, packer, shippers, retailers, and even end consumers. So it's really about just giving more time. Even a few extra days go a long way to making a huge impact in the supply chain. So that's what we're working on at Verdant.
So a question I like to ask startups is, what problem are you solving? And I've heard the word, giving back more time, or the phrase giving back more time, which I really love. But
Yeah.
maybe unpacking a bit more. What does the world look like without Verdant?
Yeah. Wow. That's a great way to phrase it. I think one of the I think challenges and opportunities we have, because I'll just say, like, you can, whether you're in Europe or here in the States, there are certain things that, at least on the surface, you might say, hey, I can, my world looks the same. Like, I can buy broccoli in the store. I don't need Verdant for that. But maybe a little bit more behind the scenes, like in the supply chain, what you may not realize as a consumer is there are real challenges with getting broccoli through the supply chain to the consumer with the sort of level of freshness that people expect or want. And so when you kind of peel back those layers, what you realize is, like, again, yeah, like, people can grow broccoli and ship broccoli, but they do it with solutions that I might argue are a bit old school or antiquated. And again, here's the opportunity for innovation. So imagine a 40-pound box of broccoli shipped. Half of that weight is ice in the box. These are one of those things that, like, you stumble upon and it's like, there's no way that's true. That can't be true. And it is. And people have been looking, trying to move away. This is not a new idea, moving away from that ice for all sorts of reasons: freight costs, food safety, et cetera, et cetera. But I just give it as an example of, maybe on the surface, people are like, is this a need to have or a nice to have? But when you find the right partner and you kind of peel back the layers and you realize there is a better way to ship and also, like for us to, as consumers, and consume fruits and vegetables, these like perishable commodities, in a way that is more sustainable or is more cost effective or delivers a better customer experience. And sometimes those opportunities like aren't right on the surface. There are opportunities. Another example I'll give is like where we have, and this has always been like the pipe dream, I'll say, for anyone who's like, there are many solutions to shelf life extension. This idea of like more time, to your point, is not a new idea. And as a startup, I mean, inherently that kind of means like we're the new guy on the block. So, we're kind of finding our space. And one of the blue sky, the big ideas is like, can you, by giving more time, unlock or allow for like new varieties or new items to be like introduced that otherwise wouldn't have been possible? So it's really challenging I love it when you talk to people and you kind of, putting our sheet in the box, like business as usual, maybe extends things a little bit. Does it really move the needle? People, how excited are they really? But when they start to really understand and think critically about their own business and operations, maybe the things that are just sort of the business as usual, the cost of doing business, when you really kind of look critically at those things and say, wait a second, what if we did it this way? The other example I'll give, which was like a true 0 to 1, was a tomato variety with one of our partners that, and there's probably so many examples like this. So I say this and hopefully someone hears this and is like, wait a second, we should, try that same thing. All the work that goes into developing a new variety for like a true, like amazing customer experience. And sadly, as you probably know, new varieties are often looked at in terms of like yield or uniformity or transferability. What about what about taste or flavor? And so there was this amazing tomato variety, to make a long story short, that had gone through, but basically was shelved, gone through all the development, was shelved because it wasn't going to make it to market. So we were working on kind of another initiative with this partner, and they were like, wait a second, what if we applied your solution here? Long story, like it was created enough shelf life then for this tomato variety to be launched last year. So something that the consumer would never have seen. So I think there's probably more and more examples like that, sort of a 0 to 1 unlock. And just as many, honestly, if not more, examples of really with our partners, importantly, we can't do this alone. We're not growing the produce, we're not selling the produce, but like partnering with the right folks that have a vision to kind of reimagine the supply chain with us, to look at the way things are being done, or maybe not being done because they didn't think it was possible, like changing the calculus on how decisions are made. And using that time to do that. So it might be kind of a behind the scenes, but I still think that's just as sexy personally.
No, but I think you're raising a really good point. I don't think a lot of consumers realize that what we get to eat, or what's available to us in the grocery store is purely what functions in our very modular, minimalistic supply chain systems. And I think when you start peeling back the layers and you look at, okay, it has to fit, like you said, in a 40-pound box. It has to be able to withstand X amount of days in transport. It has to be able to do, there's all these parameters that, especially produce, right? And I come from a produce industry as well. So that is an industry that, for me really resonates. But you look at the journey of these different products and you realize, okay, with all this, almost like a checklist of factors that the product has to fulfill, we're really limited, right? And I think I don't know, it's kind of interesting to me to hear a case study like this where a company could literally change the accessibility while still maintaining the accessibility to food while still maintaining the supply chain we have today, right? Because sometimes I ask myself, do we need to like destroy the supply chain and just go back to CSAs and like live local, right? Or can we figure out a way to make what we're doing currently more efficient, more effective? And it sounds like that's kind of what you're doing, is taking what's existing and optimizing it.
I think it's a good way to put it, Alicia. I've often heard, and maybe you as well, and maybe some of the listeners too, that like the food system is broken, or kind of saying something along that effect. And maybe I'll admit, for a while I kind of subscribed to that notion, but I was listening to something the other day, and someone made a point which I thought has got me thinking, and I'm still like, trying to figure out how I feel about it. But they said, the food system is not broken. The food system is actually functioning exactly how it was designed. But we live in a new world with a growing population, and excitingly, new tools and, solutions and data that we can employ and integrate to kind of reimagine, kind of the food system. So it's not to kind of be that Monday morning quarterback and say it's all broken, we got to like totally fix it. I think that's not, recognizing all the amazing work and innovation that has happened to this point. So I don't know, that just kind of got me thinking differently about, this food system.
Yeah.
So
100%. I think that question is the food system really broken needs to be asked, because I agree. Everyone likes to say that. So, kind of, yeah, flagrantly, is that even a word? Just so casually, they just chuck it out there. But, it kind of, I think when someone just says that, it overlooks the fact that we live in a really complex world, and we've created a food system that allows us to eat blueberries in January, right? I mean, is it good, bad? We can discuss that, but it is pretty incredible that we've created a system like this. So I think we need to kind of appreciate what we've achieved, but then also say, okay, is it perfect? Is it good? Is it, where can we make sacrifices, maybe even in this supply chain, for a better world? Those are the questions we should be asking. But I kind of agree with the podcaster, the speaker, whatever, who said, is the food system really broken? I think, yeah, we need to give ourselves a tiny bit more credit, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a notion that, and this maybe is kind of, I'm drawing from just, professional development coaching, but I think it can apply here, which is like, what got us here won't get us there. And so that's not to say there have been great strides in innovation, and, over the last few years or few decades or several decades. And I think in that spirit of continuous improvement, innovation, we can't kind of rest on our laurels. We have to continue to like find ways to innovate and partner. And thankfully, I think what gives me optimism, I think sometimes the things you read in here can be like so doom and gloom. But I find, great optimism in, conversations like this and others I listen to, but also just like getting to see and touch and, some of the great new innovations in technology that's out there. And again, it's not all about tech. I'll take my engineering hat off. I think just ways in which people are partnering, thinking long-term, the kind of private, public collaborations that are happening. Innovation takes all different forms. It's not just about, some new technology or intellectual property. I think the ways in which we innovate or integrate different things, kind of a systems mindset, all these things, when they're out there, these stories, these success stories, and they give me great optimism, for the future.
I'm happy to have an optimistic viewpoint on Agri-insider. It's refreshing to hear some positive, upbeat outlooks on the future. So, drilling a bit deeper though into your roles and responsibilities, maybe just tell us, what's your title? What do you do? What's in your kind of R&R?
Yeah, my title at Verdant is Chief Revenue Officer, and some may be familiar with that title, others may not. I like to describe it as a role that, really aligns all revenue generating functions across the entire customer lifecycle, to drive for our company predictable revenue growth, but even more importantly, customer satisfaction, for our partners. So, what that looks like at Verdant is, I lead our sales and marketing and customer success and revenue operations teams. And what I love about it is, I can say this about, I would say, like everyone on my team. It's a team, where the individuals have, I like to describe, all the experience, they bring to the team, maybe where I'm lacking in some degrees. Like in this industry, specifically produce, so many on my team have forgotten more about produce than I will probably ever know.
I like that.
And if you can just kind of like picture that, and that's such a beautiful thing, and it's amazing to get to kind of work and lead that team. We are, very much as a startup, in that kind of go to market phase. So, we're grinding. And I love that. I mean, yes, there's like travel, there's change and ambiguity. But, in addition to all the externally facing work we're doing, the sales efforts, marketing campaigns, customer onboarding, et cetera. There's also a lot of team development and building internal processes and systems. And so that's for me part of the fun, the joy of like this stage of the business. You're building, kind of SOP 0001,
Right.
foundation.
So, I mean, I think to me, and you're right, you don't hear the title CRO that often in agriculture. I mean, it's a very classic startup terminology and kind of SaaS terminology, but
Yeah.
I would say it doesn't exist. That role doesn't exist in most average agribusinesses. Maybe you'd get like business development manager or senior director of business development. So I think it's kind of indicative of the innovation you're trying to bring to the space and some of that kind of startup SaaS terminology, but there is still no denying, and I think you'd speak to a lot of startups or even traditional actors in the agri-food supply chain. This business is not easy, and especially introducing new solutions to farmers or shipping companies, it's extremely difficult, right?
For sure.
Maybe and I have some listeners in the audience who are founders as well. So can you just shed some light on why it's so difficult and how you combat those difficulties?
Well, I'll take a stab, Alicia. I'm not going to pretend to like have the silver bullet, the answer. If anyone does, please reach out, and I would love to talk with them and buy them a coffee. But you're right. There are a lot of challenges, at least both on the surface and for real. I mean, I've felt that over the last almost 10 years. And I think your question of like why, where is that coming from? What's the root of that? Is a question I ask myself a lot. I ask my team. I ask folks in the industry. I think one way to answer that is listen, if you're a new player, a new kind of solution provider in that space, I think recognizing that the folks that we ultimately seek to partner with, businesses, organizations, whether those are kind of public or private, say like multi-generational farms, I mean, there's a long history there and tradition, and so it's been said to me, and maybe you've heard it said in different ways. People do business with other people that they know and they like and they trust. Just fundamentally. And so that if you look at any one of those pieces, the kind of the people they know, the familiarity, they like, I mean, I guess you could argue maybe you don't have to like someone, but they give you a good deal. But certainly the trust piece is something that it takes time to build. And so I think that's just part of it. You have to kind of recognize, and it's really an honor. I think about some of the folks we're partnered with that have been in business for decades or generations, and like here we are, and we've been working with them for like a year or so. And it's just amazing to think about how we're now a very small piece of what's been an amazing legacy for them. So I think fundamentally that's part of it. I mean, listen, yes, like this macroeconomic environment creates challenges for for making change or new investment. I might start to talk to you about value, and all you're going to hear is cost. In this sort of macroeconomic environment with rising inflation, who wants to add another cost to their business at this point? So I think that can present challenges. I think that there's I don't think this is necessarily specific to ag, but sort of the looking for the short-term wins versus like a long-term mindset, like looking at this investment more in the long term, really clearly defining those success metrics. I think that, and the other thing I would add maybe to this too, because some of your listeners might be partnering at different parts of the supply chain. There's all different stakeholders. And I've had the pleasure of working with folks kind of along that value chain, whether that's more on the growing side, all the way through to kind of the buy side with retail. So I think as you peel back the layers on like the why, like you asked, like why does it seem like it's slow? I think there's all these factors. I saved one for the end, and I had an interesting conversation just with someone yesterday about this. But if you look at the different parts of some of the different value, like the stakeholders, listen, I think for folks kind of at that farming side, the growing side, there's they may point to a history of how they've been, maybe not day one, but over time, like forced to absorb a lot of the costs. So like of a new innovation. And so they kind of have that PTSD of like, I know what's coming. I'm going to be forced to absorb this cost. That is to say, maybe there's not a great precedent or for like sharing that cost maybe equitably across the supply chain. I think there's another, if you look at the other end of the supply chain, more in that kind of buy side retail, I think what's really challenging, and I can totally empathize, is how, you got to justify the cost of that investment and attribution. I'm paying X, I'm getting Y. When you get all the way through the supply chain, there's all sorts of changing hands and trucks and everything. Like, you get to the very end, you try to do that analysis. It's really hard to, if you even have the data, if it's trending in the right way, but then how do you attribute that? So then you can justify the cost of that investment. That's a really hard exercise. So I think that creates challenges. The last thing I'd say, which again, this came up in a conversation yesterday. I think fundamentally what I would say is the rate of like trying new things, that innovative spirit is there. I think the rate of, trying new things, and I think there's great examples of that. I think maybe what's like missing and what maybe you're not seeing or I'm not seeing or others aren't seeing is like that like adoption or scaling, real implementation. And, and listen, I'm not going to, again, pretend to know exactly why that hasn't happened. Again, it's maybe a lack of proven results, or, one of the things that I would share, there's a great organization I really respect a lot called Refed. They're a nonprofit really focused around reducing food loss and waste. And their executive director, at the recent annual summit said something, this strong message of scaling the pilots. So anyways, when I look at this long-winded way of answering your question, is there slow adoption? It may seem like that on the surface. I think there are reasons why, both macro and micro, and depending on which stakeholder you're talking to. But I think, for a lot of solutions like ours, and we've seen this, I could give a lot of examples, but this notion of like scaling the pilots, like why? Not just because that's where we're going to see the big impact, but I think for a lot of solutions, that's where you really get, the sort of representative data or results to say like, is this the right fit for my business? So how as partners can we like more quickly scale solutions to look at that true result or representative, data, to allow business leaders to make confident, business decisions about these investments. So I think this notion of like, there are great solutions out there. Some have been tried or tested, but I think this call to action to partnering in a way, there's always risk. I mean, that's like one side of the coin. Then there's opportunity. But how do we find ways to like scale some of these pilots, these solutions? And I think we'll see results, and out of that can come case studies to really drive change. Because at the end of the day, I mean, not just in this space, but change is hard, and there's a lot of inertia, around the way things have always been done. I actually, I'll share with you, Alicia, I was had the opportunity to attend a sustainability summit. It kind of just somewhat serendipitously, but this was put on by a major global retailer. This was about a month or two ago. And one of my takeaways from that event, they had a slide up on screen, and it said, and I just love this, it said, the most dangerous phrase in our language is, we've always done this, or we've always done it this way. The most dangerous phrase in our language is, we've always done it this way. And so I think that we can talk macroeconomic conditions, et cetera, but like change and the inertia, like to change, making a case for change is hard. I mean, that's not technology. I mean, that's like human psychology, human nature. And so I think that's where the relationships and the trust and, comes in, the human element, to helping driving change, the needed change in this space.
Yeah, you said a lot of really great things there. I made a little list here as you were speaking, but there's one I want to hone in on a bit more, because I also love connecting the dots a bit between podcasts. I had the privilege of speaking to a professor, Lisa Jack. She's going to go live in a couple of weeks from now. But her whole kind of take on agriculture is she focuses on agriculture accounting, or really supply chain accounting. And she mentioned something that really stuck with me that I think will kind of resonate with this question of why, which was, there's a real flaw in the way farming businesses actually do their accounting. There's a lot of lack of accountability to where costs are actually going. And I managed, the books for a agricultural business, and it's really true. And you mentioned it as well. It's really hard to attribute the reward to a certain cost. It's not as linear as input equals output as it would be in a factory, or, you've got all of these moving parts, and some things are, I would say a lot of costs are indirect costs. And, really one should just listen to her podcast, because I don't have an accounting degree and she's a professor in it. But she talked about how there needs to be kind of a re-education in bookkeeping and agriculture, because two reasons. One, I think it would allow for more adoptability of innovation, because there'd be a spot for that on the kind of balance sheets. But secondly, if farmers keep operating at a cost basis, a cost coverage only basis, we could jeopardize our food security, because these businesses aren't actually making money. So anyway, I think it's an interesting point you raised, and it kind of was an epiphany for me as you were speaking, that probably a huge inhibitor to innovation and entering the agri space is exactly that. There's just not really a house for it on this really already convoluted balance sheet or P&L.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued. I'm glad you brought that up and connected those dots, Alicia. I'm excited to listen to that. And again, I'll plead my ignorance as not an accountant. And I'm sure that plays a part. And what it also makes me think a lot is kind of like incentive structures that exist or do not exist, across this, kind of food value chain. You think about what it takes to get, a tomato or broccoli, pick your favorite piece of produce to market. And I think then we can all think about within our own lives, or kind of within our own teams or organizations, the importance of, for our teams and individuals, like creating the right incentive structures, for them to care or give a shit. I don't know what the policy is on like that on the podcast, but for lack of a better word or phrase. But I think about, if you're a retail buyer sitting at the desk, and let's say you're incented on things like sales and margin and market share. How does something like that directly connect to goals around innovation or ESG? And I'm not pointing a finger. I'm just giving you an example. I think I could give examples across, all stakeholders in the value chain. Like, how are those incentives either in place or aligned to drive some of that change or foster that innovation, to kind of account for, maybe that's kind of the accounting piece, like account for the cost in different ways. So I think there's some mechanics there. Anyways, yeah, I'll be excited to kind of listen to that perspective. There's no not sadly, but just the reality, of course, there's no silver bullet, like there often isn't.
No.
But I think it's a great question. I appreciate you asking me, and hopefully for the listeners out there too. I mean, this is just one of these things that there's so many apparent like roadblocks or kind of friction to like innovation, and I think some of these things aren't going to be solved in a lab. I think a lot of them are going to take just conversations like this, really open, candid dialogue, to, and admittedly, even for me, feel a little vulnerable and, trying to take a stab or share some of this. So I welcome any feedback and other thoughts or insights that others might have out there.
I agree. And I think part of the point of the podcast is to not be always 110% correct, but just to throw ideas out there and concepts out there and see how they stick, right? Because that's I believe in the same thing as you were just saying. We need to just have these conversations and see where they go, and not be afraid to kind of speak, because there are things that we've seen, right? Injustices, you said it too, a lot of this forcing to absorb costs at farm level. I mean, you're not saying this because you haven't seen it before. You've obviously experienced a farmer say to you, I have so many costs, I can't take one more. As much as I love this, I just can't do it, right? And how do we look at those problems and not just say, oh, okay, well, it's just the environment and we're just going to skate over it, but how do we actually address that as a systemic issue that we need to solve? And so I appreciate you kind of calling out those issues. And, even if we don't have the solution here right now today, we need to make them heard. So that's the point of Agri-insider. pivoting a slight bit. So, well, not
Sure.
really pivoting too much, but circling back, I guess.
Yeah.
Is there any advice you'd give to other CROs out there? Because I think it is, we just touched on a lot of different points, a challenging role. Is there any kind of 1-2 key takeaways, words of advice you can give CROs specifically in ag tech?
Yeah, challenging, but I don't want to scare people away. It's also incredibly rewarding and exciting.
Okay,
Gosh, I think one of the key things in that role, certainly at a startup, and really at even other growth stages, I think just really important to keep the customer at the center of your strategies, processes, etc. And that's easier said than done. And I think what goes along with that a little bit is just that balance, in terms of time and energy. This is something I struggle with, like the internal versus the external. You're building the team and the company, but how do you balance that with being out with the customer and out at the events? And so that can be in just the team development piece. So that's that internal external struggle. So just like finding that balance, and that's like leaning on your team and your peers in the organization. But those to me are kind of related, keeping the customer at the center. I would say, just maybe last couple of things quickly. And we've kind of talked about it just here a second ago, but just like, don't underestimate the kind of like time and complexity of that like B2B sales cycle, and all the different buying influences that you have to kind of form relationships with, engage with, and ultimately kind of sell to and influence. I think that's just important to keep in mind, and maybe goes without saying. Maybe I'm just kind of admitting my own flaws, in retrospect. And last but not least, I think one of the things that I've seen previously and even now is, I would say to CROs, you think about that customer lifecycle, sales, marketing, and customer success, and aligning those functions. So it creates a really seamless customer experience. A really key piece of that, especially in this day and age of data and insights, is I would say to invest in RevOps or revenue operations. It's a really critical function, one that some may be familiar with, others not. But I like to describe it as a real force multiplier. Not just the data and insights, but enablement for the team members, for myself, driving that cross-functional alignment internally. So I've seen that be a real unlock, real force multiplier. And so I would strongly encourage those CROs that are either thinking about that or haven't really considered it to invest to the extent they can in that function.
Yeah, I agree. I think good support systems also lead to better customer experience. So I can really emphasize that as well. You and I do have one kind of overlap in our CVs. Yours is much bigger than mine. I worked at Appeal Sciences as a contractor for a really brief period in time when they were just getting going in Europe, and you were, inside the belly of the beast there through, I think, probably like 2-3 funding rounds, or at least through a huge leap of growth. I mean, Appeal is Series E, I believe, and one of the biggest kind of names in the ag tech space. I think most people, when you say Appeal, they're like, oh, Appeal, right? Because they just made such a fast move in the agri, especially produce space. So you worked there for 7 years, and I think what I'd like to understand, because I think a lot of also startups ask themselves this question, how do I become an Appeal, or how do I become a Tridge? How do I get to these late stages and grow my business and become these market players and not just become a startup, or leave that kind of Series A startup phase? Do you have do you think there were any specifically right plays or anything you saw that maybe made that difference? We talked about turns in the road. Did they do something correct at the right time that triggered that growth?
It's a great question. I look back very fondly on my years at Appeal. And that was kind of the startup I was referring to earlier, jump ship from grad school, kind of at the very end of my PhD, and joined this startup there in Santa Barbara, Appeal, and kind of those early days, just coming out of the garage. I mean, I think it would be easy to say in terms of like what made that difference, as others are, trying to, ascend to similar heights or, similar aspirations. I mean, listen, there's certainly a notion of right place, right time that feels a little convenient. But, when you think about, Appeal being founded back in, kind of 2012, that was right around the time there was a really impactful, at least for me, and I think now increasingly for folks in this space, a report called Wasted that was put out. And that's what I think in large part kind of put food waste, food loss and waste as an issue or opportunity really on the map. It's almost like you could kind of go to the brewery now and like you could talk to just a random person and be like, oh yeah, 30-40% of food is wasted. Like, I know that, but like that wasn't, food waste wasn't so in vogue back then. And so right around the time Appeal was being founded, maybe some of these efforts and this space really started to grow and take off. So again, you could say right place, right time. But I don't think that'd be giving credit enough to, the kind of founders and early leaders of Appeal. I mean, listen, there's really cool technology and kind of the ingenuity sort of surrounding that, and the support from early investors too, that I think, really helped, all of us as just, really inexperienced, but just passionate, former grad students, like just dive right in and kind of just break things, solve problems. Like so many great folks that kind of held our hand, or not even held our hand, but just like really gave us kind of great guidance and mentorship. But one thing that comes to mind again, kind of the founder and the leadership, is the culture. And I think that's something, one of my mentors, Alicia, shared with me, and I feel like it very much like parallels your question here in sort of what was foundational to them Appeal having a lot of success. This notion that entrepreneurs build great teams build great cultures, and then it's great cultures that build great companies. And so this is something one of my mentors has shared with me, but it comes to mind now as you ask the question, because I think in large part it was this entrepreneurial spirit, some just like really crazy smart people that were just like, yeah, I'll get on that, airplane and we'll build it as we're flying it kind of thing. Very mission driven. And I think through the team formed and the culture along with it. And I think that attracted, it's like the flywheel started spinning, right? Like you just attract like better and better people. And ultimately then the people and kind of industry surrounding you, it's infectious. And there was some great marketing to kind of like bring that to life, I think, for the industry. And ultimately, listen, the solutions like Appeal and others like we have at Verdant and other solution providers, I mean, there is great opportunity to both create like financial impact and, whether it's financial, kind of sustainability, ESG. So, I mean, it definitely checks all those boxes as well. But anyways, those are a couple things that come to mind. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of twists and turns, and it was constantly problem solving. But I think any organization that has that kind of, in its core DNA, just that kind of strong culture and that like problem solving, I think, there's always a little bit of like right timing and good fortune and those sorts of things. But I think some of those things are really foundational.
Yeah, I really like what you said about culture. And I think good people make the place. I mean, I always say location, even when I think about where I want to live, right? Sure. Location is secondary almost to the people in that location, right? You want to be around people. My aunt says, find your tribe, build your high vibe tribe, that kind of thing. And I think that stands true for company culture as well. And you really touched on a good point there. I think also with Appeal, and you also mentioned this marketing element, one thing that fascinates me about Appeal in Europe is that it's actually a consumer recognized brand now. I mean, they have a sticker that people recognize. Not a lot of people kind of can hit B2B and B2C. So maybe that was also a part of their success, is that they kind of, at least in Europe, I know in the US, I don't think that there's as much of that, but here, you go to Edeka, which is a local grocery store in Germany, and they'll have like the Appeal avocado.
Right.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's I've seen it in store, and honestly, I'll say that was one of my proudest moments. I look back on, I have the picture saved in my favorites where, I mean, this is like fast forward years and years from when I first joined. My role transitioned a lot from the engineering in the lab to commercial. Right. And a really proud moment for me was, my parents, they shop at their local Kroger store, and getting to see, a display in store with, the avocados with the sticker and take a picture with my mom was like, just the most wonderful moment. I don't know, maybe more for me than her. I don't know. But it was just really amazing to see, my parents so supportive through that journey, dropping out of school and like startup, like, what is this? But like, never once missed a beat just to support me. And then to like fast forward to get to like show them, hey, this is what I've been like working on. And it's in your local grocery store. Such a proud moment. I feel like it's maybe worth sharing, for those that are maybe, a lot of, I think a lot of what we talked about today, Alicia, like if you're in this sort of role, some advice, or if you're in this space, but there may be people that are, contemplating, joining on with a team or this whole startup space. There's so much risk, how can I even find it in myself to make that leap? On a really personal level, I'll never forget, I was still in grad school, very kind of happily. It was a Friday night, and I got a text from kind of James, the founder of Peel, and he was like, "Hey, you free for breakfast tomorrow morning?" And I was out celebrating, as fate would have it. Like one of my colleagues, lab mates, or grad school mates, was like just finished their PhD, so we were like celebrating. It was just a great day, a great evening. And I texted James, "Yeah, sure, I'll meet for breakfast." And anyways, that's where he kind of laid out, "Hey, we're starting to scale the business. You're an engineer, right? Like, it'd be great to have you join, and we could use some of your skill sets." And it was like this. I was like, "It all sounds great. This one small thing, I'm not quite done with school," and so there I was then, like having starting to then contemplate this decision: do I stay and finish the PhD, or do I kind of like jump ship, is kind of what it felt like, and join this startup thing. And I'll never forget, serendipitously, like the next week or weekend, my parents were coming to visit Santa Barbara. And I'll never forget ended up meeting up with James and doing a tour of the appeal office at that time. And so my dad himself is his PhD, really, really brilliant guy, and has kind of worked in, large corporations. So here we are. You can picture us like touring what was kind of the shell of an office. There's like a lab, but also like a ping pong table and a beanbag chair and probably like a keg or two. So it's like there's a lot of vision, but like it's very early stage, and you can just picture. I'm like walking behind and like watching this tour happen. I'm like, oh my god, like what is my dad thinking? Fast forward to like dinner that night. I'll never forget. I asked my dad. I was like, "So what'd you think?" And I'm like, I know what he's gonna say. And I'll never forget, he said, and I before I share what he said, I think it's just important that, for those that out there, whenever you're at that fork and we're trying to make that decision, like finding those people that you really care about, and helping you overcome like fear or uncertainty. And so I was asked my dad, and I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Matthew, I think if you don't pursue this opportunity, you'll regret it for the rest of your life."
Wow.
And I was like, well, how can I, not now like take that leap? And so I even get like emotional even thinking about it. It was like just like it was like the most amazing gift, and I think, so I think about that, and you like try to find opportunities to like pay that forward, whether it's like, your friends, your own kids. And so anyways, I think back to that moment, which like really gave me the courage to make that leap and just not look back. So
thank you for sharing that. And on this kind of personal note, I think everyone's probably, well, your dog left, but I was going to say everyone's probably pretty curious about the farm, the dog. I mean, if you'd like to share a bit about what your family's doing. I know you have a small family business.
Yes. And there, I think somewhere out on the farm right now as we speak. So I do live on a farm, small farm out in North Carolina, so on the East Coast of the U.S. And I think it's important that I start by saying my wife is very much like the brains and the muscle behind the operation. It's a beautiful vegetable farm, primarily vegetables. There's some other things growing as well, but we've got a weekly CSA program, and for those who aren't familiar, veggies in a box. People come once a week and pick them up. And so I again, she is very much the brains and muscle behind the operation. I am just the occasional farmhand, which is amazing to be able to get out from behind the computer screen and get some dirt under the fingernails. And so, I'm surrounded by vegetables, all day, every day, whether, at work with Verdant or here at home. But it's my wife. We've got a son who's about to turn 2. and actually our second one on the way here in just about a month or so. So some more little farm hands for the future, and a dog that, as you said, Alicia, is his name is Arlo, and he's often sitting right here beside me. He's or behind me as my trusty co-pilot. So anyways, that's our small family unit. But man, just being, we've been on this property for like the last, I guess, almost or over 4 years, and it's just to be like a steward of this land for kind of this brief moment in time has just been really amazing. Just to be, not just because it's like just amazing vegetables, in the backyard to enjoy, but to like serve the community in this way, to have people come and provide that kind of nourishment to them. And just for my wife, like, it was always a big dream of hers. Her passion is really around education. And so really getting to see that come to life as part of her business has just been really amazing. So
yeah, woo, go women in agriculture, right? Like, awesome, good for her. Yeah. Yeah. I've actually had an incredible amount of female leaders in agriculture on this podcast, so stay tuned. You're gonna have, there's gonna be quite a few more women coming live. All right, so wrapping up, are there any final words you'd like to share with the audience before we conclude?
Gosh, this has been great. I really appreciate, Alicia, the conversation. I guess first I would say, thank you to you and Tridge and Agri-insider for this opportunity. I mean, I for all the listeners, like, truly welcome the opportunity to, connect. People can find me on LinkedIn, but, I haven't, I'll admit, historically done a great job of putting myself out there in this way. So thank you for challenging me. And for those who might be out there saying, I don't know how I feel about this whole podcast, or, speaking or what have you, it's, again, just thank you for the opportunity, but also challenging me in this way. Maybe the last thing I'd share, I don't know if it's quite words of wisdom, but just a couple things that come to mind, just like as we're kind of talking about this, we're talking about startups, we're talking about challenges and risk, a saying that I've, I guess, heard and now really maybe taken to heart from kind of the leadership of, now Verdant and kind of our parent company, GulfTech, is one of the risk of success is failure.
I like that.
If you think about that, no matter what your role is or title is, I mean, especially in sort of a startup, entrepreneurial type environment where there's a lot of, upside and potential, but also like risk and uncertainty and ambiguity, I find a lot of empowerment in that. The risk of success is failure. So that comes to mind, just wanting to share. Again, as we're all out there kind of, working to solve these problems, beating our heads against a wall, can feel like it sometimes, like that's really powerful, especially coming from leadership, to kind of create that, air cover and empower the team in that way. And the last thing I'd say too, this is going back to maybe your first question there, Alicia, how I kind of got into this whole thing. I think encouraging folks to, really find inspiration at the edges. That's what, led me to choose the grad school I did, just loving the research that happened, very interdisciplinary at the edges. And even kind of jumping into the first startup with people, like applying, polymer physics to produce, like seemingly tangential. And a lot of what we're doing at Verdant is like material science and produce and flowers. I mean, it's really, and it's not just disciplines, different disciplines or industries. I think the edge can also be, teams, the kind of cross-functional nature. So really finding inspiration at the edges, and I think that's like a where innovation can really be a spark for innovation. So just a couple of things I'd share, just in reflecting on what's been, at least from my perspective, a really great conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. You've given us a lot of words of wisdom. I think I've written down at least like 5 really critical sayings that I'm gonna, put on my wall here after the call. It's really been great to talk to you today. And I'm looking forward to seeing a picture that your mom's gonna take at the grocery store of this new tomato variety that she hasn't had in the past, right? You're gonna have that moment again soon where she's in the store and she's like, hey, Matthew, isn't this the tomato variety you made possible to be on the shelf? So yeah, I will
send that to you. I will send that picture to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you again, Matthew. It's been great speaking.
Hey, thank you so much.
This podcast has been brought to you by Tridge, the leading global intelligence and networking platform for agriculture. Visit us at www.tridge.com to find out more.